Hey guys, this is Brother Scott with the Potter's House, and I want us to look at a word together in this video and may give some better understanding on a subject. And I want us to look at Hebrews chapter 4. Now, this is going to be a very familiar chapter for many people, but there is a word that I want us to look at in this chapter that occurs over and over again. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I am going to point out some of the scriptures that contain this word. And this word is the word rest. So if we look at chapter 4, you read chapter 3, and it leads on into chapter 4 here. But chapter 4 and verse 1 says, "Let us therefore fear lest a promise," reading from the King James, "lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it." So there's the word rest, the first mention of rest in chapter 4. If we drop down to chapter 3, it says, "For we which have believed do enter into rest, as he said, as I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest. Although the works were finished from the foundation of the world." Here again, we find the word rest mentioned in verse 3. In verse 4, it does say, "For he spake in a certain place of the seventh day on this wise, and God did rest the seventh day from all his works." Here again is this word rest. And then verse 9 says, "There remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God." And I want to point something out about this word rest. And it would be this is why it's important to study the scriptures, to have an understanding of what you are reading. Now, I want to point out that in these verses that we looked at, verse 1 where it mentions rest, verse 3 where it mentions rest, um, verse 5, verse 6, it mentions, doesn't mention the word rest there, but it speaks about it. And then verse 9, it mentions the word rest. The interesting thing in the English, if you're reading this, we would think that this rest was the same word all the way through, but it's not. And this is important for us to understand because of a lack of understanding, a lack of studying on the part of many, uh, is the reason why there is a subject in this chapter that is misunderstood. Now, remember in Hosea, Yahweh made the comment or says that my people perish for a lack of knowledge, and then goes on about the understanding and how they forsook his Torah, his instructions. But I want to look at this word rest in verse 1, verse 3, verse 4. This word rest is Strong's number 2663. And this is what it means: to make to cease. The act of resting, ceasing from labor, or the place of rest, a dwelling place, a fixed abode. Now it comes from uh, Strong's number 2664, which means to make to cease, to cause to rest, to give rest, to restrain. So this is what this word here means. It can mean an abode, a place. So when it talks about entering to Yah's rest, entering to God's rest, it's talking about his dwelling place, or where he's causing you or ceasing you to stop, and now you're resting in his space where he abides. This is important that we understand this. It is His dwelling place where He causes you to cease from your work, to cease from work, to give rest. The Hebrew equivalent would be Strong's number 4496. And it's used in several ways to denote places where peace, quiet, and trust and rest are present. Here again is a dwelling place, the place where God rests to cause you to cease and to rest. It's even a place of restoration or a place of refreshing is what is being said here. So all of these rest up until verse 9. This is what this means. We come to verse 9 where it says, so then there remains a rest for the people of Yahweh, the people of God. But this is not the same word. Okay, it's not the word for rest that is used here in verse 9. It's not the word for rest that is used in all of the other verses. It is a totally different word. It is Strong's number 4520. And it's sabbatismos. Sabbatismos. And this word, and so I want to just give you some examples. Sabbatismos, it derives from another word, another Greek word, sabbaton. And sabbaton refers to the seventh day. It is a day. So he's saying that there remains a Sabbath rest. The ESV that I have right here says there remains a Sabbath rest, a day of rest for the people of Yahweh. Let's look at a couple of other translations, a couple of the versions that were the King James wants to give you the impression that this rest is consistent. This word rest is consistent all through this chapter when it's not. The King James is hiding something for all of our friends that say that King James is the best and it's King James only. If you went by the King James, you would not understand that this day, this Sabbath day, is for the people of God. It's a physical day. Let's look at Aramaic translation of Hebrews chapter 4 and 9. Here it is. Therefore, it is established for the people of Yahweh to be given a rest. It says rest, but here there's a footnote. We go down the footnote and it says Sabbath. So there is still a Sabbath for the people of Yahweh. Let's look at the Sefer Bible. We go to 4 and 9. There remains therefore a Shabbat for the people of Yah. And if we look here at all these other verse 5, he does not translate the word rest in verse 5 as Shabbat because it's not the same word. So there's an Aramaic. This is more of a Hebrew. The Sefer translation is more of a Hebrew translation. So I've showed you that the ESV says Sabbath rest. Let's look and see what the NIV, how the NIV translates Hebrews 4:9. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. So here's the NIV. Not one of my favorites, but it translates the word correctly. Let's look at, here we have the Jewish annotated New Testament. How does it translate? Hebrews 4 and 9. So then, a Sabbath rest still remains for the people of God. Here again, we could say, well, that's slanted toward Hebrew people. Well, let's look at one more. This is the New American Standard Bible. Here's what the New American Standard says. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. So we see that this day, this Sabbath rest, that much of Christianity, much of the religious world, Christian religious world, says is not for the Christian people, and it's not for us today. That Yeshua, Jesus, fulfilled that when in Hebrews 4 is one of those that they use to say that that was done. But it's just not there. But it says there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of Yahweh, the people of Yah. So who are the people of Yah? Israel. And here's the thing, you've got to be part of Israel. Paul tells us that we are grafted into that tree of Israel. So what does Yahweh, what does God instruct Israel concerning the Sabbath day? Let's go quickly to Exodus chapter 31. In verse 13, it says, verse 12 says, and Yahweh said to Moses, you are to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all, this is important that we understand this, above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, Yahweh, sanctify you. In verse 14 begins with, and you shall keep the Sabbath, because it is holy for you. And then it goes on to talk about the people that profane the Sabbath. But in Exodus, he tells Israel, which if you are saved, if you are a born-again believer, spirit-filled, born-again believer, you must understand that you have been grafted into Israel. So he is saying in Exodus 31 that above all, Israel is to keep his Sabbaths because they're holy and they are a sign between him and us. Let's go then to Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 20. In verse 12. Listen to what Yahweh says. Moreover, I gave them my Sabbaths as a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am Yahweh who sanctifies them. So here again, he gave the Sabbaths as a sign between us and him, that we may understand, that we may know that it is him, that he is Yahweh, and that it is him who sanctifies us. This word sanctified means separated. He separated us. So this is a concept that much of Christianity has lost sight of. It's more than how you dress and how you look and how you talk and how you walk. But there are some things in here that he says, you are to do this. You are to do this. But I just wanted to point this out in Hebrews chapter 4, how important it is for us to study the scriptures. Just like the Apostle Paul said, study to show yourselves approved. Approved unto Yahweh. But here again, if you just stick with your favorite version. If you're a King James only and you only understand what your pastor says and you don't study for yourself, you're going to miss sight of some important issues. So let me encourage you to study, to research, to dig these things out, and to have a better understanding. Until next time, Shabbat Shalom.